koutou katoa. Welcome to MOTAT. I'm your MC for tonight, Lorraine Tiffany. We're excited to be hosting our final talk of our 2023 season of Ngā Korero Rererangi, Aviation Conversations, right here within our beautiful aviation hall. Very shortly, I will welcome guest speaker Doris de Pont, who will be joined by a panel to discuss how flight uniforms showcase Aotearoa globally. If there are any topics for future talks you're interested in, please let us know by chatting to us tonight or by dropping us a line. We would also like to take this opportunity to invite you back to MOTAT during our regular opening hours to experience Te Kōtiu, a new immersive digital experience where you can uncover stories from the skies of Aotearoa. From the migration of our native koaka to celebrating the growing diversity within the aviation and space industries. Te Kōtiu, meaning to swoop, showcases key moments in aviation in Aotearoa with stunning, immersive digital projection throughout the aviation hall. We also invite you to support MOTAT by telling your friends and family about it and encourage them to visit or make a donation tonight. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome Doris de Pont. Doris de Pont ONZM is a multi-award-winning New Zealand fashion designer. In 2010, DuPont founded the innovative New Zealand Fashion Museum. Since then, she has co-curated more than 20 exhibitions that have been seen by more than 1 million people. She is truly a champion of New Zealand fashion. Please put your hands together as we welcome Doris de Pont to the stage.
Thank you, Laura. It's a hard act to follow, a professional stewardess. So what I would like to do is give a little, because I'm with the Fashion Museum, give a little history of the Air New Zealand or the New Zealand uniforms. It wasn't just Air New Zealand, of course, as many of you know. The Air New Zealand's made up actually out of two airlines, TEAL, Tasman Empire Airlines Limited, that's what they were called, and NAC, the National Airways Corporation. And they, TEAL changed its name to Air New Zealand in 1965, and NAC joined Air New Zealand, bringing together domestic and long-haul flights in 1978. So when I'm telling you this story, there'll be uniforms that were exclusively worn by the TEAL staff and uniforms that were worn exclusively by NAC staff, and then that merging of the two labels. So initially, TEAL employed only male stewards due to the requirements of the job that included handling heavy cargo and sometimes passengers to and from the flying boats. This is one of the TEAL flying boats here on our right. So you can see that the entry and exit to those things was not an easy task. But in 1946, the first 6 stewardesses, these 6 young women here, were chosen out of 3,000 applicants. One of the rules was that they had to be unmarried, and if they married, they had to leave. Passenger safety was a large part of the duties of a stewardess at that time. So the military-style uniforms that they're wearing here were chosen so that they would exude authority. They would be in charge. It was a single-breasted jacket with gold buttons and epaulettes, a man-style shirt and tie, a Glengarry hat with the 2 buttons on the front, black leather gloves, a leather handbag, black laced-up and heeled court shoes, and the double-breasted overcoat that you can see here, part of the uniform that they wore. In 1950, TEAL decided that they needed to spruce up the uniforms, and they approached David Jones in Sydney to design new uniforms. They had a winter uniform in black and a summer uniform in khaki. The garments were all made to measure for the hostesses in Sydney, so that each of the garments perfectly fitted the stewardesses. They had the long line-fitted single-breasted jacket that you see here, tapered in at the waist with a matching straight skirt that had an off-centre pleat, inverted pleat in the front and another one in the back to make it easier to move. The skirts finished well below the knees. The suits were worn again over a men's style white shirt with a plain tie that matched the suit colour, black in winter and khaki in summer. Likewise, the shoes, handbag and gloves were all colour coordinated. The finishing touch again was the Glengarry cap. And the unique thing about the Glengarry cap, and a matter of huge pride for the women, was that it carried a full wings metal badge. The full wings were usually only worn by pilots, so it was a great honour for the stewardesses to have full wings on their hats. The hats apparently were kept on in flight so that the passengers would know who to call on if they needed something to identify themselves. In 1956, this uniform was actually substituted for another one. So the summer uniform and the in-flight uniform was changed, and it became a white shirt-waisted dress with black epaulettes, and it looked like the uniforms that nurses were wearing, which was sort of a logical choice because many of the stewardesses at this time were actually registered nurses, and they were encouraged then in that uniform to also wear their registered nurses badge at their throat when wearing this uniform. So this is their TEAL story, but over at NAC they also took on this sort of very military style of uniform. The uniform was similar, but they did their very best to make it look very appealing and very glamorous. And it is what I remember. I remember when I was very young, that the thing that I wanted to be when I grew up was an air hostess, because they were very glamorous young women, and they travelled the world. So the winter uniform was this black pencil skirt with a single-breasted black jacket that had gold bands on the cuff that showed the rank of the stewardess. The skirt in this instance, in this instance, was a white blouse, and it had a Peter Pan collar, so there was no need for the women to wear a tie. In summer, the uniform was the white nurse's style uniform dress again, but it was a very beautifully detailed dress, so it didn't have, it had lovely details like concealed buttons, rows of stitching through the collar, that broad belt, 3 rows of pin tucks down the front of the front panels, and it had red epaulettes. And of course, they still had the smart shoes, handbag, gloves, and the black Glengarry cap with an NAC embroidered logo. And this, I just love this photo because it sort of shows how glamorous that being an air hostess was made to look. I don't know that it is. We're going to talk to some stewardess later, so we'll find out exactly how glamorous it really was. By the 1960s, international travel was becoming faster and much more accessible for more people. And so to encourage new passengers and confidence in flying, TEAL felt it would be helpful if the hostesses were seen to be both fashionable and at ease in the air, so less formal and more modern and sophisticated. And they found the solution to this objective really here in New Zealand with LJ. Now, LJ was the manufacturer in New Zealand who had the license to produce Christian Dior in New Zealand, and they approached him, and as a consequence, Yves Saint Laurent designed the uniform for the TEAL hostess. They were the very first hostesses in the world to have a uniform designed by Yves Saint Laurent. It was made here. It was made out of a new fabric that was called tricotine, and that was I was talking to Owen a little earlier on, who has organised some of the textiles for some of the uniforms, the New Zealand uniforms. There's a lot of chemistry involved in fabrics and in getting fabrics that are suitable for corporate uniforms. And so this was a new fabric, was a wool blend, but with some other fibres in it that particularly gave it great strength, good drape, beautiful luster and elasticity. So without having to put any elastic in the fabric, the weave of the fabric made it very mobile really and easy to wear. It was also chosen because it had really good colour fastness, and it could stand repeated washing and ironing, which is an essential if you're travelling in a uniform. The Dior design was a simple turquoise-coloured straight skirt teamed with the crisp white blouse. It had a cravat at the neck that sat perfectly inside the rounded collarless neckline of the loose-fitted jacket. And originally it had a matching pillbox hat, which was very much the fashion at the time, the Jackie Onassis pillbox hat. It was a much loved uniform. The hostesses really liked it, and the passengers. And it communicated to the outside world that New Zealand was a very sophisticated place. When TEAL became Air New Zealand in 1965, the uniform stayed and it went with the hostesses, but with some modifications, the ones you can see here in the photograph, where the hats have changed and where the hemlines have gone up. And although they kept this tailored Dior designed outfit, they in 1969 they actually got a new in-flight uniform, so the stewardesses would get onto the plane and change into a short caftan. Came in 4 colours: turquoise, watermelon pink, lilac and strawberry, and it had the stylised hibiscus embroidered on the sleeve. The caftan was a major item in the introduction of the hibiscus theme aboard the DC-8s and the Electra aircrafts, emphasising the South Pacific market that the airlines served. They had, you can see at the neckline too, a small stylised frangipani flower. You can see also the interior of the plane, that the sort of vibrant colours of that era that was in the furniture, but also on the stewardesses. Over at NAC, they also had a redesign of the uniform in 1966, and again it was a step away from the military influences and into fashion. This uniform, called the Golden Cloud, was designed by award-winning local designer Barbara Herrick of Babs Redon, who sadly passed away last week after many, many years in the industry and a great supporter of the industry. This uniform was first revealed not in New Zealand but in Europe, where it was highly praised for its fresh design. Back home, the hostesses were also enthusiastic, saying, "We don't really think of it as a uniform. It's more like a smart suit." And the distinctive gold topaz colour, designed into a 3-piece suit, coat and hat, was an unusual shade, but complemented a wide range of skin tonings, which you wouldn't expect, but it did. And it set the New Zealand hostesses apart from the usual blues and greens that you saw in uniforms everywhere. The fabric was produced in New Zealand by Wellington Woolen Mills, and the uniforms were made in Auckland by Classic Manufacturing. The white blouse that's underneath it was designed to be worn in flight without the jacket, so just with the skirt. The distinctive hat that was also designed and manufactured in New Zealand by plumbers, milliners of distinction, and it featured the 6-carat gold godwit framed in a circle, which was the NAC insignia. These hats were called, very disparagingly, the Coleman's mustard pots. The finishing touches, of course, were, again, the black gloves and the handbag. But jewellery, earrings and nail polish were strictly forbidden at this time. We'll hear later on what the rules are these days. So I'm very curious to know what the prescriptions are from Air New Zealand these days. But even uniforms evolve, and as hemlines on the street went up, so did those of the hostesses' skirts. And they lost the gloves. But the gloves were back in 1970, this time in white and worn along with knee-high white boots, a short-sleeved crimpling mini dress and a spacey helmet-shaped hat. Popularly known as the Jellybean uniform, the Airline dresses came in 4 colour schemes: spring green or cherry red, or white with a white trim, or white with a red or green trim. One really wonders about the practicality of a mini skirt in dealing with overhead lockers. This uniform is the last NAC uniform before it merged with Air New Zealand. And it's the first one that Catherine, our stewardess who will be with us later, wore. So this is when she joined Air New Zealand. It's been suggested that this uniform was designed to reflect the colours of the New Zealand flag and Union Jack, and to coincide with the visit of the Queen to New Zealand in 1977 for her Silver Jubilee tour. It was also the first time that the uniform included trousers. The designer of this uniform is unknown, and I don't know that anyone's ever found out who designed it, but it was manufactured here in New Zealand again by Holproof in Onehonga. Meanwhile, over at Air New Zealand, the Dior uniforms were replaced in 1973 by this one, the first Air New Zealand uniform to be designed by a New Zealander, the always flamboyant Finca Lucas. The uniform consisted of an A-line pinafore dress worn over a gold blouse with full leg of mutton sleeves that featured a screen-printed Māori motif on the sleeve. The look was completed with a striking tailored jacket with flared sleeves and navy trim, turquoise Breton hat and navy accessories. Where previously uniforms had a warm coat, this one had a very dramatic cape instead. The iconic stylized golden koru badge made its debut with this collection. These uniforms didn't have a very long life though, perhaps in part because of the multiple buttons on the sleeves, on the cuffs. You can see they've got very deep cuffs with many buttons, which I imagine would be very tiresome to get in and out of, and they buttoned down the back. Perhaps, too, they were more fashion than wearable, and this uniform was replaced 3 years later by another French designer, Nina Ricci. This uniform was colour-coded, Pacific blue for cabin crew and darker teal green for ground staff. All the women's garments were designed to mix and match. The dress uniform suit was a softly tailored and belted jacket and knee-covering skirt and optional trousers. Nina Ricci of Paris designed a geometric border print that was used for the other garments in the collection, a long skirt and a top to wear for the dinner flights. They had different outfits for dinner flights and daytime flights. A pleated short skirt and two shirt styles, one with long sleeves and a pussy bow, and the other short-sleeved and open-necked. The stewards also adopted light colours, a sky blue jacket with a Koru emblem on the embroidered on the pocket, and light grey trousers with coordinated pattern ties. Now, the fabric that's in these photos, we're really lucky to have samples of those fabrics, the real-life original samples here on the stage. So if anyone wants to have a little look later and a feel, you are very, very welcome. So although NAC merged with Air New Zealand in 1978, it took 9 years before the two divisions, domestic and international services, had one unifying uniform. And this was the unifying uniform, made and designed and made by Isabel Harris of Thornton Hall and of Hullabaloo fame. If people are of that era, they will remember Hullabaloo in Queen Street. It was rolled out in August 1987, and it was a collection, a uniform with very few but very clever pieces that allowed for a variety of combinations using the basic colours of teal and navy. The blouse and the skirt featured a specially designed pattern print with a subtle koru motif in a random squares of navy and teal on a white background. And that, I have a sample also from Owen of that fabric if anyone wants to see what it actually looks like up close, which I was very curious to see because it's quite hard in the photos to see what the print was, and I'm a bit obsessed by prints. The top was cut to blouson over to a hip basque, and it could be worn buttoned up to the neck or open to create a revere. The double-breasted jacket with brass buttons and epaulettes, and it had a calf skimming skirt with two pleats and a gabardine navy blue coat. Was the last piece in the collections. The accessories included a sharp boater-style hat, and a large shoulder bag and 2 silk scarves, one long and the other square. Both of them featured original prints, navy blue, teal and white with subtle koru motif. So this uniform didn't have a very long life, but it was a very, it sort of signalled what was happening with Air New Zealand of bringing these things together and very strongly carrying that New Zealand iconography, I suppose, within the uniforms. This next uniform, along with the Dior design that we saw earlier, is the uniform that Amelia Wickstead, who has won the contract to design the new New Zealand, Air New Zealand uniforms, cites as an inspiration for her design process. So this one and the Dior are ones that have made her think about how she thinks New Zealand should look in the world. And while the Isabel Harris that we just saw unified the look for the flight crews, this one by Barbara Lee of Christchurch, which was rolled out starting in 1992, completed the project of creating the same overall corporate look and corporate style across the whole airline all around the world. So flight crew, ground crew, international crew, booking crew and things, all wore a combination of this uniform. The wardrobe featured a custom print again and a collection of tailored separates in combinations of Pacific jade and dark navy blue. And with the introduction of the Pacific Wave livery to the aeroplanes in 1996, the uniform was refreshed again to align seamlessly with the overall colour and identity of Air New Zealand. So designing a uniform is not a simple process. It needs to be designed and then tested across the workforce. A friend of mine who worked on the ground in Nelson was one of the testers for the Zambezi uniform. She was asked to wear and report on all aspects of the garments, which were then modified or changed or changed completely in response to staff feedback. They would wear the garments and they would come up to Auckland and have these days of feedback and with all the sort of issues and the benefits of the different things that they were wearing. So it took 18 months from the inception of the conception of this design to the delivery, with collaboration between Air New Zealand staff and Zambezi. This collection was worn by cabin crew, pilots, airport travel centre staff, and while the management group were differentiated from the general staff by the colour that they wore. The collection used the natural colour palettes of greys, of schist and slate, and teals with varying hues, which coded for different members of staff. So they used the colour to designate where people's status within the flight crews, within the crews, but also their role. Merino wool featured heavily in the suiting and in the knitwear, and there was a Maori design featured on the front panel of the shirts and on the merino wrap. For the first time, ties were optional. I think this uniform was one of the most polarising uniforms with people. Some people loving it for its understated style, and others hating it for its perceived dullness. It also, therefore, had a relatively short life before this one, which is so familiar, it hardly needs me to talk about it. It was introduced in 2011, and the brief included a requirement for a uniform colour palette to work in harmony with the newly unveiled aircraft interiors, to reflect contemporary New Zealand themes with a cohesive visual uniformity, and to provide choice depending on body type and preference. And you can see in this image really how diverse the teams at Air New Zealand have become, from that lineup of stewardesses in the white uniforms to a complete mix of ages and sizes and genders. So making a uniform that is distinctive and wearable by so many different people is a real feat, and it's going to be a huge challenge for Amelia. Anyhow, it's certainly been a very distinctive uniform, and so from this, I think it's a really good point to jump off and talk to people who've got real experience with these uniforms and not just from the pictures and stories. So, perhaps, Lauren, can you introduce our panel?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Doris. That was amazing. So we will now... Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. We will now be moving to the panel segment of tonight's proceedings. So our first panellist that I'd like to invite up, we have costume designer Barbara Dara, who has a lifetime career costuming actors from both New Zealand and international film and television. Barbara has received several awards for costume design and Emmy nominations for her work. Our final panellist is Catherine Shulenta. Now, Catherine has over 36 years of aviation experience. She's also worn and worked in over 5 iterations of Air New Zealand uniforms, including NAC, Isabel Harris, Barbara Lee, Zambezi, and our current uniform, Trelise Cooper. So please put your hands together and give a warm welcome for Barbara Dara and Catherine Shulenta.
Yeah, well, welcome, you two. We've already been chatting lots, so we'll do some more now. I just put up this lovely picture of Catherine in her uniform.
Birthday on board.
Your birthday?
It was my birthday,
okay.
middle of the night.
Fantastic. Yep. Oh, fantastic. Good. So, so tell me, how did you get into flying? What made you want to be a stewardess? Was it those uniforms?
It must have been the red, white and blue. So 1984 saw the takeoff of my career, which lasted, the flight time, 36 years. And I landed back in December 2020, right in the midst of COVID, where redundancies, voluntary, involuntary, and a word we'd never heard of, furlough. We'd never heard of that before. So all those words were brought in, and I took voluntary redundancy at that stage. So, during that time, I wore 5 uniforms, as you heard. Coming into Air New Zealand, you had to come through domestic. Sorry, dear. You had to come through domestic, so we had to wear the red, white and blue. You were sent south to Wellington or Christchurch. Nobody got to stay in Auckland. The only way back was if somebody had left or transferred out, and you transferred to Auckland International or Auckland Domestic. 1987, as you said, was the first uniform which saw us dressed as one crew, which was lovely, yeah.
Fantastic. So I see in this picture that you have chosen to wear the blouse and the skirt rather than the dress.
That's right.
Can you tell me a little bit about why you've made that choice and how much autonomy you have in the choices of what you wear?
So there was the dress which my colleague Anna is wearing, and I chose to wear the shirt and the skirt quite a lot, actually. I preferred the skirt. It just looked more tailored when you were off the aircraft. So flying long haul, you sleep on board. With that uniform, you could roll into the bunk and you could roll back out, and you didn't look too dishevelled because you don't have a lot of time to tidy yourself up before you get into the service again. So I just found it more comfortable. With the dress, it tended to cling around your legs and your bottom. So you had to wear a petticoat, which I found too hot. So I preferred the skirt. Yeah.
It's very interesting to hear that you actually that you sleep. You take rest in your uniform. It's a huge demand on the textiles.
That's exactly it. So you're going to be in those uniforms sometimes. We're flying ultra long haul now. So 20 hours is nothing. We used to have disruptions. You'd be in them in 24 hours. You're still sitting in the same uniform. So it has to be something that can actually, durability.
Exactly, yeah.
Absolutely.
So what would you say are the most important criteria for a uniform? You've worn 5 of them. Which are your favourites? Which are the good things about the uniforms, the ones that you've appreciated most?
Absolutely. So my 2 favourites would be the Barbara Lee and the Trelise. They were really easy to wear, easy to... Barbara Lee was the first time we brought in a nylon shirt, because everything had been cotton before that for safety and if you're in a fire. So it was just easy to wear. We could wash and wear. Sometimes you got caught overnight with what you were standing in, so you could rinse it out and it'd be ready the next day for you. What else? Yeah, it was just easy. It was comfortable. The Barbara Lee had the flowy skirt. It also had the tailored knee-length skirt, which I wore a lot. But I was flying short haul at that time, and I wore that flowy long skirt all the time, especially around the islands. It was cool. Yeah.
So what would you say the essential ingredients are for a good uniform?
Well, comfortable. It has to be comfortable. You're in it for so long. Functionality. I don't know if any of you realise, but all those cupboards that hold all the tea and coffee teacups, you've got to pull those down, pull the next lot forward, pull that back again. So there's a lot of overhead, not just the overhead lockets, but all those in the galley standard units, we call them. You're pulling, shoving all the time. The Zambezi uniform had a belt. So every time you reached up, it got stuck under here. So the uniform was modified a bit later. We were allowed to, it was optional to wear the belt, which was good. So functionality, yeah. You're flying into extremes. Snow, hot, cold, Singapore where it's humid. So good luck, Amelia. You're going to be having to sort that one out.
Good. Very good. So that was mentioned too when I was just doing a presentation in the 1960s. In the 1960s, the uniforms had to be worn without jewellery, without earrings, no nail polish. What's today? What are the prescriptions?
We have a really strict grooming guide, and we actually get given a booklet, and it tells us what earrings we can wear, what colours. So they're a stud, diamond, if I still remember, diamond, a plain diamond, no clusters, a pearl, only white pearl, no black pearls, and gold, a plain gold. So there's really rings. I think it's only on 2 fingers, only a certain amount, no thumb rings, nail polish. We got given a colour palette for our makeup, our nail polish and our lipstick. Shoes, we have a height regulation for off-board shoes, walking off the aircraft, and on-board shoes, because you're standing for 15 hours or so you have an on-board in-flight shoe.
Oh, and are those shoes, are they part of the uniform, or are they shoes that you need to acquire yourself?
No, everyone chooses their own shoes, but there are restrictions. It's totally plain, no adornments, heel restrictions, no platforms. Sometimes it's hard to find.
Yes, yeah, and I imagine you would take more than one pair of shoes on the plane.
You do. You have your shoes that you wear on board and the shoes that you wear off the aircraft.
Yep. It's a lot of things to consider.
And you need to stand out. So we stood out in the with Trelise, obviously, but I remember one day boarding in Sydney, and I worked in business class, and I was serving the champagne, and I saw these people. They were there was a discrepancy over the seats, and I looked and I thought, oh, okay, there's a woman sorting it out. She's the ground staff, but it wasn't the ground staff. She was wearing a grey suit, and it was the mother, and we were wearing the Zambezi grey suit, and I thought, so it looked like I wasn't actually assisting, but then I came around the other side and I realised it was whoops. Yeah.
So not so strange indeed, that little story about the stewardesses in 46 keeping their hats on so that the passengers would know who to go to ask an important question.
Emergency as well, because you're going to have so many other people that are going to want to take over. You've got to know who to look for, and you've got to be able to stand out. So there's a safety aspect of this as well that has to be taken into account. So.
Yes, I imagine safety aspects too with the clothing that, in terms of buckles and bows and ties and things that can
Flammability,
get caught.
absolutely. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So Barbara was the person who was responsible for making the replicas of the Air New Zealand uniforms, or the NAC and Air New Zealand uniforms for their 75th anniversary. And so some of the uniforms she had originals that she could copy, and some were replicated from photographs. And they made these uniforms so that contemporary stewardesses could model them as part of the exhibition. So they made some indeed for display, the ones where there were holes, gaps in the collection. But they also made some for stewardesses to model, so people could compare the different uniforms over time. And this is the Golden Cloud. The Babs Redon, and it's one of my favourites. It's one of my favourites because I'm a maker of clothing, and so when I look at this and I see the beautiful seaming from the sleeve through the bust line, and then and the bound buttonholes, and just the detailing in the making of something like this. I wondered, Barbara, with you. First of all, how you came to undertake the project to reproduce the uniforms?
Well, it was out of the blue. I had a phone call. Would you like to do this? And as I have a great passion for research, I said, sure. What have you got? So the boxes came out. Some of them had original uniforms, and they had a name of an air hostess that had worn it in the past, and then there were gaps. And Air New Zealand wanted to fill in the gaps by recreating the uniforms that weren't there anymore. And some of them were a little bit of a challenge. The
Vinca-Lucas.
Having to digitally print all the detailing on the sleeves again, making the buttons, dyeing the fabric and getting the fabric to have the same weight and feel of the original. I think I must have had part of the costume, of the uniform, to be able to replicate. And of course the colours had to be dyed. It was actually every element in that series of those uniforms all had to be reproduced, either digitally or buttons had to be spin cast. The little badges, they had to be embroidered from scratch, and a lot of it was from imagery only. And the lovely Marion, who is so clever, who cut them, we'd look at them and think, I wonder what the back looked like, because we only have photographs of the front. So we had to be quite lateral in what a uniform cut jacket of that period would have looked like. So we followed those rules of history and time, and that's how we managed to pull them all together. And the hats were quite interesting.
Tell us about the hats. I think the hats are very interesting too, because they often change, even within the same design period, they change. So this one here, the original was a stitched hat, which is this one, and then that was replaced with a felt.
Yes, and how I was fascinated how long it must have taken for a uniform, how many of them had to be recreated, and the time it took to stitch those hats, because they were like 1/4-inch stitching apart, and they were beautifully put together.
Fantastic. So would you say there's some sort of common features across the uniforms that you made? Are there some things that all uniforms have or should have?
Yes. Tailoring being one, the consistency of a well-cut jacket, as you'll see all the way through, the beautifully cut, the beautifully put together. The early pieces were extraordinary, and there was so much handwork still done in them. I'm just trying to think, it must have been the Dior, where it had a button and then it had a frame around it. Now, the only way you could make those is making them by hand. And the buttonholes are all made by hand. I mean, you wouldn't even find that in anywhere today. nobody. We just make fast fashion, even in the uniforms. So the longevity isn't the same.
That's interesting. Indeed, the jackets are indeed very it's striking, aren't they? They very
Yes.
much capture the fashion of the time. The shapers and the jackets are the ones that carry the.
Yes, that nominate the period of time, except for the hemlines of the skirts, of course.
Always the hemlines, up and down.
They went up and down.
Yes, so that was the.
And the other thing is the bucket hat carried through for quite a long time. Like your favourite one there that still had them with the TEAL. And then they had the space version with the jelly bean outfit, which we had to make as well.
Yeah, no, fantastic, aren't they?
Yeah.
So I'm curious, looking at when you looked at the garments that you had, that you had to copy in the hemlines again, the 60s and 70s, with the hemlines going up. Do you think, did you have any examples of hemlines that had been taken up a little further than they were originally, or perhaps dropped back down?
I didn't notice it, only in the photographs. It was interesting because I did notice, I did get confused at one point when I was going through the boxes because there was the skirts were different lengths, and I wondered if there was I had no one to answer the question. I didn't know.
We had a few that modified these.
Did you?
Well, I only ask because I can remember at school, that the creeping hems,
Yes.
and then you had to go and kneel to make sure that they had to touch the ground when you were kneeling. That was the length you were supposed to wear.
That's right. But I think they were really challenged when the jelly bean dress came along because they were so short. And I must admit, I held it up next to me and thought, oops, they were brave women. Very
Yes,
short.
and of course a short dress is different from a short skirt, because with a short skirt, if you lift your arms, the skirt still stays in your waist, but with a dress, everything goes up from the shoulders. Yeah, anyhow, enough of that. So, Barbara, what would you think makes a good uniform?
Well, it's a really good question, isn't it? I think it is. It's a two-piece. It's flexibility. Now, with Catherine, knowing the background that they've got to wear them for such a long period of time, they have to sleep in them, they still have to look fabulous all the time, you'd be really looking at the textiles would be the first before, and then from the shapes that suit those fabrics, I guess is the key to it. So with contemporary fabrics today, I believe that you could probably come up with something pretty classy, fitted, something. What is quite good about the last set is how you can interchange. So it can be there to suit every body type, and everybody can feel comfortable. I think that's one of the keys, isn't it?
Yes, because indeed you see in that last photograph how diverse a flight crew is.
And that's why you asked about the Barbara Lee, because we had 3 skirts, 3 lengths, 3 different blouses, and we could all mix and match what we wanted. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you another question, actually. I said in 1946, the young women who were taken on, the 6 young women, they had to be unmarried, and if they married, they had to leave. And I do believe that was the rule for a long time. Did you experience that?
So when I joined in 84, you were allowed to be married. Yeah, you could have children, actually. I had my son in 1990, and I don't know when, but prior to that, the girls did leave quite early. And I remember being on the flight. It was on a 747 coming from Singapore, and there were 5 of us that were pregnant. And we were about 6 months pregnant. And the poor passengers looked at us, and I said, "Don't drink the water." It really was. It's changed now, and it's a lot more accepting. But back then, it wasn't really accepting. No. So, yeah.
But when you were flying, you were allowed to be a married person and
Yep, you
flying.
could be married and you could.
And
be
there was no
pregnant.
age restriction?
There was when I joined. It was 55. Yeah, so that has changed now. So we've just had a few crew that have actually been on television. They've been flying 50 odd years. They were 70, and I knew them. And actually, I think Ron's in one of those pictures as a young man in the which uniform was that? The Nina Rishi uniform. There's a young guy with a moustache. That's Ron, and he was on television a few months ago. He's just retired. So, yeah.
And so the other thing I'd like to just, the reception of the uniform. So one of the important, we talked about the Zambezi uniform, that was probably one of the most controversial, and I know that there's a lot of chatter about releases and about the colours and the motifs and things. So there's a reception of the uniform by the passengers, there's a reception of the general public in New Zealand, but there's also the reception internationally.
Yeah.
Is there anything about that you can share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially with that hot pink, everybody went wow. Especially in the cabin with the purple lighting. The passengers would get on, and they'd all comment how a lot of the Americans really liked the colour. Overseas, we stood out, especially walking through an international terminal as a group. We really stood out. And that's something, and it reflected New Zealand, especially when the boys took their jackets off and it's "Good day, mate" on the back, and what else? It had all those little "Hey, bro," all those little Kiwiana words there. They really stood out, and people actually took interest and actually asked questions. So yeah, you felt very proud to be wearing the uniform. Yeah.
Good. Well, I think we're just about ready to open up and see if anyone on the floor would like to ask anyone up here or anyone in the audience a question.
Hi, Catherine.
Hi, Rachel.
Just popped into my head. I wondered, what happens when you would tear or damage the uniform? Would there be someone there to repair or?
Yes, that did happen in flight. So the ashtrays in the doors, sometimes, even though there was no smoking, they weren't allowed to remove them from the aircraft. It was part of the FAA regulations. So they'd leave them open. You'd walk past and you'd actually catch a shirt and tear it. We just had to sew it up ourselves. Yeah, and the boys would always, in the middle of the night, "Hey, can you sew this up for me?" All my buttons come off. But we carried a little kit on board, a little sewing kit. Yep, it did happen, little malfunctions.
And there's one other story that I wondered if you'd like to share. I remember we did that interview about the red, white and blue when you used to fly into the windy capital and open the door.
So the red, white and blue was the domestic uniform. And in those days, flying on the 737, there was no air bridge. It was the air stairs. So you extended the air stairs on your arrival. There were little arms in the doorway that you flip down. The engineer would come up and extend the last bit to connect them, and then the passengers could disembark. So you would flip them down. You got both hands down. You can't, in use. And then a big gust of wind would come, and that skirt would be right over your head, the dress. And the engineer, much to his amusement, and the passengers all standing waiting to get off, everybody had a laugh. I think they set the young hosties up, the brand new ones. We got set up all the time. So, yeah.
I think to that point, I was wondering around regulation undies. There's regulations on your nail polish, on your makeup, and your jewellery. What about undies?
You're exactly right, yeah. And we had to wear a slip or a petticoat. It wasn't allowed to be visible past the last button. With the Zambezi, we had to wear a T-shirt bra. Couldn't wear a lacy bra because it showed. The Zambezi wasn't forgiving. Yeah.
Now, before we open the floor for more questions, I do believe we have a question from aviation expert Fletcher McKenzie.
Thank you. One thing I'd love to hear from you guys, because so much knowledge sitting in the room, so thank you. from 3 different aspects. Love to hear if Amelia rang you and she said, hey, look, I'm going to design this stuff. What can you tell me? So from each 3 of you would be fantastic.
I guess it's very much, as I said before, like choosing the appropriate textiles that are going to be comfortable for those people for their long haul, the long wear. It would be key because textile development has come such a long way in the last few years. I think it's a I would suggest you start there. And as I said, I really think the tailored jacket is a must. You can put a tailored jacket over a dress, over a blouse, over a T-shirt, and suddenly you are ready to walk out looking great. I do have one thing I find quite interesting, which as a detour, pants. Did the air hostesses like wearing pants?
So with the red, white and blue, we had trousers, and it was of a knit fabric. And the Zambezi brought the trousers back again as well. I personally prefer to wear skirts.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. Yep. I've noticed that the skirt does feel more of a corporate look.
That's just how I felt.
Mm.
Yeah. The other thing that Zambezi did, which was we were allowed to wear knee-high boots, which was really amazing. And I remember showcasing our new uniform in Narita for the opening of the Star Alliance terminal. And I was told I had to take my boots, I had to wear them with my dress, my skirt, I had to wear the wrap. I was told by what I had to showcase. So, and everybody was quite taken back with the boots, which was quite nice. I think it was something that happened then. Would I ask Amelia to consider that? No, I wouldn't, I don't think. What I do think for Amelia, I'd like we had pieces with the Barbara Lee that we could mix and match, and that suited a lot of different shapes and sizes and ages as well. Because we had a mini skirt, we had a long skirt, and we had the straight black skirt. So, yeah, pieces would be for me, I'd say.
Yes, I think for me the same suggestion. The one, and I did read actually that she had proposed. I'm obsessed by prints, and I think the print, a distinctive print. I'm always, for me still the best uniform in the whole wide world is the Singapore Airlines, and it's got without a jacket, but it just does. It's got a print that says who you're looking at, and I think getting a really good print and working really closely, perhaps with a New Zealand artist or someone like that, to develop a print that speaks of who we are here now would be my starting point.
Great. Thank you, Fletcher. Ladies and gentlemen, Fletcher's new book, From the Pilot Seat, in which he interviews 23 Kiwi pilots, is available for purchase from the MOTAT shop.
Thank you.
The floor is open for questions.
2 questions from me. The first one, you've described the restrictions about makeup and jewellery. Can you describe restrictions about visible tattoos? My second question is there a particular international uniform that you have admired? An international uniform that you have admired?
Oh, absolutely. Lorraine, you're currently employed with Air New Zealand, so I ceased employment in 2020. We weren't allowed any tattoos that were visible. And I think that was on the news. There was a Maori tattoo that actually wasn't allowed, and the girl wasn't employed by New Zealand. That was very controversial. I think things have changed. So when I was there were no tattoos, and actually they had to disclose, even if they had them that weren't visible, they had to disclose. As for an international uniform, I love the trellis. It was so beautiful out there. It was very feminine and colourful, and we stood out. We didn't get confused by anyone that whether we were ground staff. You knew who was staff. The trellis is beautiful. It really stood out in its time.
Barbara, when you were doing the replica or the reproduction uniforms, how did you source the fabric? Because fabrics are very difficult in small quantities.
Well, if I'd known about you at the time, I guess because of my long history in fashion and in costume, I have access to fabric merchants and agents where I would take the samples to and explain what I was looking for, and probably sometimes we imported them. With the digital prints, at that particular point in time, you could only print on a synthetic, which has changed completely now. You can digitally print on anything. But that was a limitation then, so I had to find a fabric that was very similar to that blouse, but in a synthetic. The suiting, trying to get those colours, was nigh impossible, as you can imagine. So it was a matter of purchasing the greige, which is the no colour, and having it commercially dyed. So it took many samples of colour to get it correct, as you can imagine.
Hi, I'm interested to know how these uniforms disappeared and how it was that you had to try and find them again. And when someone leaves Air New Zealand, what happens to the uniform? Do you have to hand it back? Does it belong to you?
No.
Where did they go?
So I'll answer that part. When you leave in New Zealand, you return everything. It all goes back. It never belongs to us. Even our IDs are not ours. So everything gets packed up in a bag, and I remember doing that December 2020, going to the international terminal, and it was totally empty. And it felt very sad, dragging my little wheelie bag with everything packed in it and taking it upstairs and saying, "Here you are."
Oh.
It was very sad. I did keep a couple of aprons though.
Full disclosure.
Sorry, Barbara, up to you.
Nobody could answer that question in Air New Zealand. They have an archive that I think almost like a volunteer or somebody employed there looked after. Because I know once I looked at the the uniforms, they went back into their tissue paper, into the boxes and back into a closet somewhere. So how they disappeared, I'm not sure, but I do know that they are allocated into different museums. So Te Papa has a collection that I think might have been replicated prior to me doing the ones that I did. So where the originals go, mystery. You have one. Yes, so I've heard. So maybe people now realise that the advantage of holding on to them and redistributing them into museums.
So that's what I did. And I donated them to MOTAT. But when I did that, I had to get permission from Air New Zealand, who actually said to me, "Do you think you can give them to us? Because we don't have any." I said, "I'm sorry, they've already gone." Yeah, they didn't have, you're right. They didn't have a history. They didn't keep it.
No, it must have been garbage, do you think?
Very tidy people.
Or hidden, kept, the odd person.
Yeah. So I know crew do keep the odd one, and just as a memorabilia, but I was having a clean out, so I sent them to Rachel. So
Fantastic. Be interesting to ask Air New Zealand what they do with the uniforms, especially when the Trellis ones are
Going to go.
Yeah.
I'd like to, there's just one thing perhaps for the people in the audience, so everyone in the audience. All of the uniforms we've seen come through, I think almost all of the uniforms have had a hat.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Do we wear hats? Do we need a hat? So, who thinks we need a hat with the uniform?
I like a hat with a uniform.
makes it look like a uniform.
Good. Okay. I just wondered about, nobody in civilian life wears a hat, but
Our
all of
bowlers used to get stolen quite often.
What?
Yeah, on flight. Yeah, passengers would take a little souvenir with them. You'd lose your bowler hat. Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
I know. There's a few out there, I think.
Very good. Well, I think that we're just about done. Lauren, would you like to wrap up?
Just have to get my mic first, ladies and gentlemen. I think that we will wrap up there. Thank you so much for being here this evening. I have loved listening to the history of those uniforms. As an ambassador for Air New Zealand, I've actually had the opportunity to wear several of those uniforms, including the jelly bean uniform, which is highly impractical, can confirm. But to hear the story of the creation, the design, that was just amazing for me. So thank you so much, ladies, for sharing with us this evening.